All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Scott Simpson. How are you doing?
Hi, Kent. I'm doing as well as can be expected. Thank you.
What do we have in these challenging times? We have a comedian on the podcast.
A comedian who cries.
Yeah, that's right. And am I going to be able to tie this back to Silicon Valley? Yes, I am. Because before becoming a comedian and starting a comedy show, Scott worked at Amazon and then no less than Apple, working in books at Amazon and then books and podcasting at Apple. So talk a little bit about that, and then we'll get over to what the hell is going on in the world of comedy. But first of all, how are you doing in these, what are you doing? Unprecedented times, challenging times?
We mix it up.
Oh, yeah.
We mix it up. Yeah, we wrote 25 adjectives and we cut them up and we put them in a hat.
Yeah.
I think today it was timid. These timid
times. Yeah, I think everyone started with challenging, and then a lot of people were like, well, I'm sitting at home. It's not that challenging. It is unprecedented.
Right. Yeah, they're times. We can all agree that they are.
I have to find some minor key piano music for this too, which is seems to be the go-to move for every single commercial these days.
Yeah. I'll be taking every opportunity I can to give out my Venmo.
Yeah.
During the show.
Yeah.
But everything's fine. We're fine. I'm fine here. I will say this morning I dealt with a crow. I don't know what a crow. I mean, I know what a group of crows is called, but I don't know what
murder.
It was one scarier than a murder this morning. There were about 75 crows in the tree that's right outside my window. And I signed up to get notifications for when the next sign of the apocalypse is unsealed, and I did not get anything.
Yeah.
So I'm a little off balance this
morning. You witnessed a murder.
I witnessed a murder. That's right.
Yeah, it's cool. Like all the cars and stuff are gone in the city, and you can hear the birds. And everyone's like, "Oh, you can hear the birds. It's great." Like, I don't think it's that great. Like the crows are kind of annoying. The doves are super annoying, like with that weird sound. Like, I don't love it. I guess I'm a city kid.
Well, I think when our ancestors were much more in contact daily with the animal kingdom, they had a less sanguine view of said animals.
Yeah.
And I think it's coming back to us. We're like, oh, right, they can be jerks too.
Right. And unlike our ancestors would be like, that's really annoying. I'm going to go kill that bird and eat it for dinner.
Right.
We're like, that's really annoying, but I'm not going to hurt it. Like, come on.
Well, yeah, I was
gross.
I was like, that's really annoying. What can I find on Amazon to help me get rid of them?
Yeah, exactly.
And it turns out it was this is macabre, but this is what I purchased this morning. Purchased I don't know if you know this or if everybody knows this, but the way to get rid of crows is to show them one of their brethren dead.
Yeah, that works for people too. Like, yeah.
Is that why I was never good at business?
Yeah, exactly.
So I bought a lifelike, a death-like crow to hang from the window of my office. So It's going to be a weird portent.
Hopefully this problem's solved.
Yeah,
Let's do this. I want to do this path because it's a really interesting path. Somehow you start out at Amazon. What were you doing at Amazon for starters?
Well, Amazon was my first real job. I was one of those kids who graduated from college and then traveled around for several years and landed at Amazon by accident and started as a book buyer there. And I loved it because I've always loved books and I've always loved the experience of shopping for books. So the opportunity to do what Amazon has always done best, which was find those incredibly hard to find books that rounded out their huge inventory, was really exciting. And then this was right around 2000. The fact of digital media was becoming more clear. So Amazon started a digital group. I was added to that group to help work on book-related projects. My first project there was to scan paper books to make them digital. So essentially the project that I'm sure lots of folks who listen to this are familiar with, the digitization of physical books at Amazon, which was of course done at Google and elsewhere at the same time. It was a fun project because even though the end product was this incredibly clean index of all kinds of information available and researchable and accessible in a new way, the fact of getting it into that format was like, shipping huge containers of books to third world countries to
Right.
have them scanned. It was fun.
And this is when Amazon's really starting to impact the world, right? Where you go from a bookstore, like a huge Barnes and Noble has whatever X titles, like 100,000. And then you'd go to Amazon, they'd have like 4 million, like just some number that you couldn't fathom in the biggest bookstore you'd ever been in downtown New York.
When people now complain about Amazon, I often understand the nature of their complaint. But as someone, I don't know where you grew up, but as someone who grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania way before the internet, for whom a bookstore was like 19 books in a Christian
Right.
greeting card store, it still seems like an amazing thing to be able to just have an idea, go look it up, and then have a book about it available the next day.
The one thing I do miss is and it's not the corner store, like the independent bookstore. I miss like the Barnes and Nobles. Like I loved going to a Barnes and Noble and you walk around and there's a stack of books and there's some book you never would have thought of in a million years. But then you're like, oh yeah, I need that Crimean War, whatever the hell it is, whatever it is for 20% off. Or
Sandy from Barnes and Noble recommended it.
Yeah.
Who's Sandy? She's working at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah. But I'm into
it. I agree. I love that feeling, and I miss the easy availability of those types of stores and the little ones. And really, any way to browse is really sort of an exercise to me in thinking as well. So record stores do the same thing for me. I'm sure everybody who goes in, you go in and you end up, you don't buy anything, but you've thought 15 different things that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and you get to, back in the day, you used to interact with the record store guys, which because they were the guys who got the job at the record store. So they were pretty cool.
They were the cool ones.
And you had to be careful that when you went to the counter, you'd want them to go, oh yeah, good choice, man. You didn't want them to roll your eyes.
No, yeah. You bury the Osmonds below the Neil Youngs.
And there definitely was that thing where you'd walk in and you're like, what is this that you're playing? Like, this is pretty cool. And they're like, oh, it's
It's somewhat less romantic to be holding your phone up to the speaker in the locker room at the gym when you hear a good song.
Exactly.
Than it was to like ask the person at the desk.
So then from one most valuable company soon to be in the world to another, you end up at Apple.
Yeah, that's right. I should say I have always not been very good at business, but the one thing that I've always loved about the world that we live in now is the growth of opportunity for people who don't have access to the highest levels of publishing. So the self-publishers in every domain. So that's where I sort of made my expertise. And when Apple launched their podcasts, they brought me over to help add podcasts to the catalog and manage and edit it. And that was by far the most exciting time of my career.
Yeah. And what of podcasts for Apple? I kind of remember this time there was Audio, which was the big podcasting thing, which became Twitter. I think it became Twitter because they gave up on Audio because once Apple did it, they were like, screw it.
Right.
But podcasts, it seems like podcasting in the world of Apple, whatever Steve Jobs at the center of that world, wasn't a big thing for them. Even if people loved it and all that, didn't seem like it was one of their top. Like the ads weren't like, you got to buy this iPhone because you can listen to like two guys talking about something.
That's right. Two guys talking about something. No thanks.
Yeah, screw that.
I agree with you. And the wonderful thing about podcasts and one of the things I love about big companies is that you can often find yourself in a team of 1 or 3 people doing something that no one else in the company cares about. As long as it's cheap enough for the company to do, they'll let you do it, and they don't care. And so we operated with very little, you know, I don't know, enthusiastic input from even the folks in iTunes specifically. They were much more, to be fair, reasonably concerned with music and with TV and movies than they were with something that didn't make Apple on paper any money.
Yeah.
I think Steve was also, and I think you could always see this in the iTunes ads and in the product announcements. Steve Jobs was always a music person.
Right.
Like for him, an iPod was U2 and Fleetwood Mac, and podcasts likely never sullied his playlists.
Right. Right. And so I think most people would be stunned that podcasting at Apple was 2 or 3 people.
It was tiny. It was tiny. I mean, I say 2 people, and I of course mean that on the sort of product side.
Right.
On the engineering side, it was also, there were a few more folks, but it wasn't huge because, the wonderfully open structure of podcasts made it easy for anyone to create, access, and then catalog what was out there. So, infrastructure-wise, the only thing that Apple actually ever held was, a list of XML feeds for several thousand pieces of content that lived elsewhere on the internet. So to the extent that the engineers had to do anything, it was just to organize and sort of create a taxonomy for the back end. And then to the extent that we had to do anything, it was to just, find and better call those shows to make them available to listeners.
And what were you seeing in those early days? Because it seems like a couple things happened. Like one was that anybody in the world reasonably could now do a podcast. Which, anyone in the world couldn't get a radio show. Right. And then anybody in the world could also listen at any time. Pretty big transformation. Like what were you seeing like happening that was like, oh, this is a thing, or this isn't a thing. This is. Yeah.
Well, I love that, of course, and it's the coolest thing. And when people complain about the fact that anybody can create a podcast, you don't have to listen to it, Right. So it's wonderful if there are 1 million podcasts out there, if it means that there will be 5 more in the world that are great.
Right.
So at the beginning, when we were just starting, one of the biggest concerns was we didn't want to have anything in the directory that was just full of copyrighted music, because that, of course, especially at the time, was a huge issue. So my job at first was to listen to every podcast that was submitted to the iTunes store for at least a year, I think, at least a little bit more than a year, until we were able to come up with structure and with tools to figure things out more scalably. I listened to so many sermons.
Oh, wow.
I was whatever the opposite of converted to Christianity.
Like, I've heard it all. This makes no sense. This makes no sense to me now.
Like all new media, I think religion often leads the way. So to the extent, that never became a significant story, but still remains one now that we aren't necessarily talking about at a popular culture level. Religious podcasts were huge because they were so cheap and because ministers were already doing podcasts in the form of sermons every week. So they were just sort of converting it to that. Other than that, I mean, at the beginning, it was a really ham radio vibe. Like it was for nerd, like it was a nerd thing.
Yeah.
And there were, Ricky Gervais was the one person who was doing a show that was getting non-nerds to at least pay attention to the medium.
Yeah. So when did the radio people start coming over? Like, was that early on, or did it take them a while
Well,
to
when you
stop
say radio
looking?
people, what do you mean?
Like the NPR types, or I
Oh,
guess
sure, sure.
Mark Maron, I guess, was kind of doing real radio with Air
Hmm.
America, and then he came over at some point.
Well, you see all this, and you probably know this, but I just learned that Kodak invented the digital like
Yeah,
some doofus at Kodak invented
yeah,
the digital camera, and of course everybody understands what the lesson is
yeah.
without me needing to say the rest of it. That I think was and has been an issue for companies as they approach the question of podcasts or more open distribution from the beginning. NPR, as an example, always struggled, still struggles less visibly with the concept of international global distribution of their content, which previously made money by being syndicated
Right.
to a number of regional markets. So when we say NPR, we know what we mean. But before the internet, NPR was NPR via KCRW, via KQED,
Right.
and then those local radio stations would have the financial relationship with NPR, and then those stations would play the content. So NPR had a lot of issues to resolve up front with regard to disintermediation of what used to be their customer.
Right.
So it took them a while to get it, but right when we started, I think, is when it sort of exploded as a medium, and when they realized they had to figure it out. And of
Yeah.
course, they've done a pretty good job.
What do you make of podcasting as you see it today, where things are getting bought for $100 million? And I mean, there's still there's still a million
Sorry,
podcasts.
I just remembered one other thing. Just this sort of corporate ineptitude, like is always such a wonderful and
Right.
inexhaustible well of wonderful things.
Right.
The Simpsons podcast was, when I was there at the beginning, the Simpsons podcast was always in the top 5, always a really popular podcast.
Right.
And you think, okay, Simpsons podcast, Simpsons, cool, great. What is the Simpsons podcast? The Simpsons podcast was it was a dude reading the plot of the episode.
Wow.
It was like Homer reaches his hand out of the window of his car to punch his son Bart.
Right.
Not ironically, not in a funny way. It was
just reading it straight.
And so when Fox would come into the office, they'd be like, "Well, we have a podcast, and it's pretty good."
Yeah,
and we had to slowly disabuse them of the notion that they were making quality stuff.
Yeah,
and then now to answer the question that you asked, it's crazy to see the transformation. And as an old school internet person, the thing that I've always loved about podcasts was the open nature of them, the fact that they're on the open internet. And now I think, of course, we're seeing a transition, at least in some corners, to a more paid platform version, like the Joe Rogan deal, which just was announced. And I don't remember how much he's getting paid, but it's money. He's making money.
$100 million
for Spotify.
Yeah. It's a licensing deal too. I don't think they own the thing. I think they're paying him.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know.
I hope so. It's
a podcast. I make shit up and nobody ever checks. It's great.
Perfect. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Let's do this for hours and hours.
Yeah, exactly.
This is wonderful. I of course love podcasts for the same reason that I love self-published books. Anything with a low technical barrier to entry can very quickly and efficiently expose genius in a way that is much harder to do with video, because it's much higher overhead to make something that's decent. Whereas with audio, if you've got a computer, and my son, I was once like, I have a podcast to my son, and he looked up at me, he was like, "Oh, so you have a microphone and a computer?"
Oh, whoa, tough crowd.
Thanks. Yeah.
Hey,
no
do you have
longer lives with us.
before I make fun of it, do you have a DJ night? Yeah. Like the only thing more cliche than having a podcast is to be like a middle-aged guy with a like some weird DJ night.
I think the new middle-aged guy thing is to have a ring light for your show.
Which
That's
makes no sense. Like like there's been theater lights and television lights for like what 50 years now, and they're not rings.
I like that. I like that you have an opinion about ring lights. I think that's if you're a middle-aged man, you either have a ring light or a strong opinion why you don't.
And you can tell I don't ever do not have a ring light. Do you think anything in pod? I was talking to you saw Tiki Bar TV, right?
Oh sure, yeah.
I had Dr. Tiki on, and by the way, that show just seems lost to history. Like the number of people I talk to, tech people, old school tech people, I'm like, there's this thing, don't you remember it? The number of people who say no is pretty shocking, given how kind of amazing that thing was.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. There are a number of those kinds of shows that were Ask a Ninja. I don't know if you remember Ask a Ninja.
Right.
That was another one that was great. And I think for whatever reason, they just didn't get written into the 4-second version of the media history of the first 10 years of the century.
Well, what he said was kind of interesting. I wonder if something similar happened in podcasting. He's like, look, when web video, YouTube came along, everyone said, oh, what's going to happen is there's going to be these webisodes. Like people are going to produce like TV shows, but the shows are going to be produced by whomever anywhere in the world. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going to happen. And then what actually happened was just a bunch of other weird things like haul videos, or I'm going to prank my girlfriend by telling her this. And like just this, these weird subgenres of stuff.
Right.
That are really compelling and really interesting and really popular. Like I'm not disparaging them, but it didn't end up being a bunch of webisodes.
Right. Yeah. And I think you can of course still see the tin-earedness of predictors when you look at the current fortunes of Quibi.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, I love saying Quibi.
If I was anywhere near that room, like how did somebody not say, like when they went, look, it's going to be mobile and it's going to be short. Like how did nobody pull out their mobile phone and say, here's YouTube? Like,
well, I think it probably was a case of somebody convincing two people with influence that this is a good idea. And, if you give someone a 10-minute PowerPoint presentation about what kids are up to Meg Whitman, I think you could, I saw Meg Whitman and Jeffrey Katzenberg. Is that?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
All you have to do is say those two names to me, and I can tell. I could have probably guessed the entire history of Quibi. I could have probably even guessed the fact that it was going to be called Quibi just from those two names.
100%.
Oh,
incredible.
I love life so much that it's really impossible to guess what's going to be good, and people can't sort of dictate, especially in media, what's going to take off.
That one I feel like we knew.
So. That one, oh God. Some you can see from a mile away.
So let's get to the fun part. So you're like, fuck this corporate thing. I'm going to go be a comedian.
Oh, I didn't know we could swear on this. Jesus Christ. I would have pulled it out.
Yeah, because then I can put the little explicit thing on and it gets more downloads.
Oh, fair point. At what point do I take my shirt off?
Yeah, exactly. I guess
no? Okay.
The video thing. So you leave, not only do you become a comedian, you start Cheaper Than Therapy, which is like a comedy show. It's got a space in San Francisco. Yep. It sells out multiple times a night. I went to it kind of expecting it's my friend and it's going to be like a lot of somebody yell out a historical time and a sandwich and we're going to
right.
And it was fantastic. Like it was great. It was funny. Like it was really good.
Thank you, Kent. I appreciate that very much. And I've always enjoyed spending time with you in a social situations. You're a fun dude. Creating that show was not really what I was thinking that I would do when I left. For me, it was just, I realized I was always, despite the fact that I loved this one little corner of the media landscape, and still do, and still find it fascinating and interesting. For me, the number of times I was asked to take the funny photoshops out of my keynote presentations to my bosses was, it was enough to make me realize that I have a problem and that I needed to leave. And so I left. And when you start in stand-up comedy, if you're however old or however funny, you really kind of do have to climb up the ladder. And so I started doing open mics around San Francisco.
Right.
It was about 8 years ago. And it's, of course, difficult, but also incredibly fun. And it was I wouldn't say a slow climb, but it wasn't a fast climb to the middle where I
Right.
am now.
Right.
But it was a lot of fun. And somewhere along the way, I met a couple people who were doing this show, Cheaper Than Therapy, and I joined up with them when we were going to do one show a week. And then over time, we added another night, and then we added another night, and then we added 2 shows per night. And now we're doing, until recently, we were doing 6 shows a week, and it's been a blast. It's been so much fun, and I'm really grateful that you said what you did about it, because it's really important to us for that show to be, for every show to be really great experience for the people who come to see it. And that doesn't at all only include the 75 minutes of comedy. We want the whole thing to be a really great night for folks. And
well, it's in a cool space downtown San Francisco, like in a cool space near Union Square. Of course, it's downstairs because that's where comedy. Like, there's no comedy place like above a store, right? You never like, you go upstairs. The guy's going to be on in 10 minutes. It's always downstairs.
On
Super
the
cool.
54th floor of the Chrysler Building.
Yeah, it's in the Denali conference room. Yeah, it's
nothing good has ever happened in the Denali conference room.
And then there's a bar, and like afterwards, you kind of interact with performers. Like, very, very cool.
When you came, had we renovated the theater yet? Were we using a microphone yet, or were we just shouting at the crowd?
It was a microphone, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we recently, November or so of last year, we renovated the space, added seats. We, this is one of the many reasons why I'm bad at things. I didn't realize, you go in a theater and you're like, okay, nice seats. I never think of those seats as coming from anywhere.
Oh yeah,
theater seats. When you walk into a theater seats, they're sui generis. They're just there, right?
And they've been there since 1952.
They've been there since 1952, and they'll be there long after the Crows have taken over.
Right.
We expanded the theater. We wanted to add 15 seats, but that meant we had to get all new seats. Seats are hard to find, theater seats. Yeah. So we ended up having to rent a U-Haul, and we drove out to the Central Valley, and we found a Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall that had, a ton of seats that they were renovating. So we had to drive all these.
Is this because it's like
Jehovah's
tough times for the Jehovah's Witnesses, or were they upgrading?
I think it was good times.
Okay, they're getting
the
rid of
JWs. Yeah, I think they were doing well, and we were living off their success. So we had to put those in, and we added a new bar, and we did all this stuff, and right about when we were ready to really hit the ground running, it was we didn't.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, what could possibly happen?
We have 90 people jammed in a room. They're all laughing. So how did it happen? Like, what was there a last show and you're like, we know this is going to be the last show for a while, or were you kind of hearing things?
Isn't it weird? I hope when we have collective memory of this time that we find a nuanced and an accurate way to describe how everything went from, oh, well, looks like it might, and then instantly everything's closed.
Yeah.
That weird transition.
Yeah. I was just thinking the other day, I had gone to Hamilton like the week before, and they had done a thing, the ham for ham where you can win a ticket. They'd done where they sold the whole place out with lottery tickets.
Yeah.
And we won one, so we paid, I guess, $5 a seat. And since, I mean, I don't know how to put this, but since it was like all the people who would tend to pay $5 for a Hamilton ticket, it was a really rowdy show, which is perfectly great for Hamilton. It was really great.
Right. Yeah.
And then I think I went to the Fillmore 2 weeks before that and saw Magic Giant, which is a super fun band. Okay. And then I was like, is that the last band I will ever fucking see? Like,
side note to this conversation, which we need to keep having. Have you gone on like the middle-aged man, like, this might be my last run before I get COVID, like I got to get healthy kick yet? That's where I am.
Yeah, not really. Like I'm always in the state of like, I need to work out more. I need to run more. I've always got a 10K planned. So I've
right. Got some apps.
Yeah, I absolutely have the app.
The illusion of having done something when you buy an app.
Yeah, exactly. And then we just got a puppy.
Oh, wow, that's cute.
Yeah, it's like a cattle dog puppy. So my physical activity is pretty good.
Good. Okay.
But we're drinking all the time.
Sure.
Like I can't like, yeah, we get to 5:30. We're like, well, let's have a cocktail. And then,
yeah. That time for me was similar to you. We had done a weekend of shows, and the weekend before that mid-March time that everything sort of closed down, we were kind of joking with we had just stopped shaking hands with everybody when they came out of the theater.
Right.
And hanging out with them close up when they came out of the theater. And we were joking about it the weekend before, and then that Thursday, March 12th, we were going back and forth, and my partner John was he was pretty sanguine about our chances for that night, but that switch had already flipped in my brain.
Yeah.
And in my head, I was like, well, this is insane that we would do this.
Yeah.
And he was on the other side still. So we had a little bit of a back and forth that day. Yeah. I'm glad we didn't do it, because the next day it became even more obvious that the whole book had closed on those types of
so
gatherings.
That show did not happen.
That show did not happen. So that Thursday show that's where I count my time as changing was March 12th when everything shut down.
And so what was the last show? Was the last show something where fewer people were showing up already, or was the last show just like, hey, we're in the sunshine?
It was like a decent Sunday show. We had no real sense that it would be our last show.
Yeah.
And I think it didn't even seem serious, because the thinking was, even if this is our last show, we'll take 3 weeks off, and then we'll be back.
Yeah.
And we didn't really have a sense. And now we're looking at the calendar and realizing that it could be 8 more months.
Yeah. That was the second weird transition from like, okay, well, we need to do this for 2 weeks because, we need the ventilators or whatever it was, to this kind of weird, like, I don't know what it is. Like, well, now we're just all going to stay home forever until something, until there's a cure. Like,
well, there's that really strange, I almost said, well, I don't know what the right way to indicate the layers of groups who are, for whom, some people kept working the next day, right?
Yeah.
Police, they still were, working.
Right.
For some people, this has been not a vacation.
Right.
And it's not obviously a vacation for the rest of us either, but for some it was nothing. And then for others, like for, I think, people in my world specifically, this is going we're going to have the longest
Yeah.
hiatus of anyone.
And so what do this is where I've kind of, I really have a tough time just imagining this now. And I don't know if we like went too far with this whole lockdown thing and freaked people out, but like going to that Hamilton show or going to like the Fillmore to see a show, like now it's a thing that I can't imagine.
Right.
And like how does this come? Like, how do we get back to going to see a show, a comedy show, a rock show?
Yeah, it's a great question, because this thing has entered our morals, and it's entered into us deeply, where we see somebody who's acting in a way that is just slightly less safe than we act, and we think they're crazy.
Oh yeah.
And if we see someone who's a little more careful than we are, we think they're crazy.
Yeah, I get the escalation when I walk on the street. They're like, someone's walking 6 feet away, and then someone's like, I'm walking 7 feet away. I'm a little superior to that guy, and I'm wearing a mask, and I'm 10 feet away. Like, gosh.
I know. And then I become the guy hating that guy for caring so much, which is the worst kind of guy to be of all guys.
Exactly.
But I don't know. I don't know what's gonna I think performance is going to be curtailed for at least the year.
I mean, I'll say
imagine
the alternatives do not fucking work. Like I do not. I saw Dropkick Murphys do an online thing.
Right.
Yeah. The SNL with the.
But to be fair, you picked like the worst possible example of an online band trying to be good, like the Dropkick, like Irish. They're like hard rock, right?
That's true, Irish punk.
Irish punk, like
just any of them.
I couldn't mosh. Like my puppy wasn't like getting into the mosh with me. It was kind of
God, the mosh pit. It's so great.
Mosh of one.
I don't know. I see videos. I saw a video of like the National has been replaying old concert videos. Like, oh my God! Like, is that better?
Well, it's more suitable to being at home alone by yourself and worried about your marriage.
Exactly. And then the comedy, like as I understand how comedy works, you go to a live audience and you tell them a joke, and they're like, "Oh, that's not a funny joke," and then you go, oh, "Okay," and you write a better joke, and that's how you make comedy. So it just seems like without that mechanism. The SNL with the kind of no audience.
Right.
I don't.
Well, I applaud their energy, their attempt.
For sure.
I applaud the attempt, and in the few instances that it worked, it was actually very exciting. Yep. I know exactly what you mean, though. I've been very interested to watch people try to make. Of course, for me, comedy is the most interesting thing. Work online, from the most basic version, which is essentially it's like a FaceTime with 42 people.
Yeah.
Some have worked. I think as long as if you stay open to the potential and aware of the difference of the medium, then the previous live version, then you have a real chance to make something interesting. I've got a friend, his name is Chris Riggins. He does a show, like a Zoom, just a regular, Zoom conference call, but a show. He's just funny, and he just tries. He'll have like somebody in the audience pick up their computer and like take it through the house so he can make fun of their house.
Oh, okay, that's
for
good.
Everyone. Right. And it's whether it's like works or doesn't work, it's something new, and it's exciting, and it's different, and it feels specific to our time and our space.
Yeah.
That I really love.
Yeah.
And so I think that there are on Twitch, some comedians are using Twitch to do live streams.
Yeah.
And the musician Dave. Do you know Dave Bazan? You ever heard of Dave Bazan? Pedro the Lion.
Oh yeah.
So Dave Bazan is Pedro the Lion, and he does every Wednesday at 4:00. He does a performance on Twitch, which I have grown to need to see every week because it works in the format. It's him playing his songs, which, he's sort of a ruminative singer-songwriter, so the media works perfectly for him. But then he'll stop and he'll look at the comments and he'll say, "Oh, yeah, no, I don't wear that red hoodie anymore, but
Right.
that reminds me of this song." And he'll do some interaction, but in a way that's not irritating. I've seen people and become excited by people using these kinds of off-the-shelf tools to jerry-rig some version of fun and participation that
Yeah.
it's sad because we need that more than ever, and our standard methods of getting it are diminished.
Well, on the other side, I can't imagine. I mean, not that anyone feels sorry for some of these people, but the economics of it, like the way Patton Oswalt packing theaters around the country, or
Right.
a Foo Fighters tour that must employ like 120 people and make $500,000 a night, like
Right.
is not getting replaced by the zoomy zoom zoom thing.
Zoom, zoom. Yeah, no, it's not, and I think the economics are obvious and they're bad for performance, and I hope that we start to see some viable substitutes online, and I think we might start to. I know that some of my friends in the sub Patton Oswalt level of fame and success,
Right.
have started to do online shows and charge money. There's one called Hesby Street stand-up show on Thursday. That's great.
Yeah.
And, again, because we have access to these kinds of out-of-the-box platforms like Eventbrite or other ticketing services, it makes it at least potentially viable to cobble together some income. I just, the one, some of the things are exciting, to see in terms of the business aspects of this and entertainment. And then you go to Cameo and you see just the real bottom of the barrel,
right?
Like $19 for the bass player from Poison to wish you a happy quinceanera. Exactly. It should be called bottom of the. It should.
Those
rock
are rough.
bottom. That's
well,
Cameo, rock bottom.
I'll finish with that. That is the thing in my mind. And again, all kinds of things you can't imagine obviously happen, because in February I wasn't like, oh yeah, we're all going to be locked in our homes in April. But imagining like a Broadway show, a big Shoreline show, like I just find it hard
gone.
to just imagine it. And like, I don't want to go to the show where everyone's wearing a mask and standing 6 feet apart. Like,
no. Yeah. I mean, unless it's that kind of show.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Is this like a Tom Cruise?
To say Fidelio at the door. If you want to get it. Well, let me finish with this. So you had a podcast called "You Look Nice Today," and now it's
That's right,
California King.
That's right.
What is your plan? You've got an empty comedy club. I know. You've got a podcast. Like what?
And the thesis of the podcast, or the running joke of the podcast, is that we can't make money doing the podcast. So there's no way to like get ads for the podcast either, because the whole premise of the show is that we're bad at it and we're bad at business, and all the things that we touch are unsuccessful. So that was, if I had been able to start the show 10 years ago with an eye toward a pandemic in 2020, providing me with a secondary revenue stream, I might have made a few different decisions. But for now, we're just, I think for anybody creative, you just want to find something that works and keep making and keep writing. And that's really the thing that makes me need to get up is to do stuff.
Right.
Financially, it's not so good, and we'll have to figure that out. We've fortunately been able to, because we're a business, we got a little bit of money to be able to pay the few people on our payroll.
Right.
But it's going to be pretty rough for a while.
Yeah. So, what are you optimistic about in the world of live performance? I mean, is there anything that you're looking forward to, or is it like
That's a great question.
is it all podcasts all the time now?
Well, everybody who's over a certain age knows this, and especially anybody who's interested in new business and new opportunities. Like these kinds of times are the most interesting
Yes.
because all kinds of stuff that we have no idea that are going to be born from this. All the famous people who will come out of this, like not to say she's famous, but the woman who lip syncs the president.
Yeah.
She's fantastic.
Yep.
And she's a product of this terrible thing. So I don't mean to be too vague about it, but I think the fact that we're all being pushed in this direction is going to crack open many more ways of communicating. I think just as a basic, at a minimum, things like FaceTime, which I always loathed.
Yeah,
that's my default now is FaceTime. Yeah. I could not have imagined wanting to see your face.
Right.
And I don't mean that in the general way. I mean in the
face.
very specific way of your Kent face,
right.
Talking to you before this, and now it's delightful.
Yeah, this is fantastic. Well, yeah, it's just on my mind. Maybe I went to more shows than most people, but it's to me it's not the biggest thing of all of this. Obviously, people are dying, and that's the biggest thing. But it's kind of the most melancholy. It's kind of the saddest thing where I'm like,
were you a person who really enjoyed going to live shows and things?
Yeah. Because what happened was so San Francisco has great venues, like Great American Music Hall is great. The Fillmore is fantastic. Bottom of the Hill, Rickshaw a little, but there's 3 or 4 venues that everybody comes to.
Yep.
And if you kind of would pay attention, for example, during Lizzo at South by Southwest blew up. If you were paying attention to South by that year, she was playing at Great American Music Hall, and you could have bought tickets a month later. Yeah. And so with YouTube, you're able to look at a show and go, oh, this isn't 4 guys standing with guitars. This is really interesting. Like this is a Dan Deacon show or Kate Tempest or whatever. Yeah. So we really did go to shows, and it was very cool. And I did see the National last year too. That was cool.
Yeah, it is. I once yelled I once saw the National play, and I yelled that they were boring one too many times, and I was asked to leave.
Oh yeah.
I've since come to recognize my error. I like them a lot, but yeah, I miss that. In fact, do you have any notifications for shows in your calendar that pop up? I got one. A couple of days ago for Hamilton Lighthouser from the Walkman. It was like, your tickets are ready. I was like, fuck you, they're not ready. October 4th is when it's happening.
Yeah, we had I've never seen Flaming Lips.
Oh yeah.
And they were coming to Great American Music Hall, which in itself is kind of odd, but I'd never been, so I was going to that. And then I still had the October shows are still kind of like, we don't know.
Yeah, no,
like those aren't canceling yet.
Yeah, what are you gonna, like you said, is it gonna be, none of this works none of this works half-ass. You either have to go full online or an actual show.
Yeah, I agree.
Any of the stuff in between, comedy relies on the crowd being a little uncomfortable, a little cold, a little too close to the people around them. It sort of jumps you out of your skin a little bit. But when you're just sitting by yourself with a mask on, and I don't, whether it's music or comedy or whatever kind of performance, it's going to be weird.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that Cheaper Than Therapy comes back sooner rather than later. And
thank you.
Everyone should listen to California King, right? Now, is that a working title, or is that like?
Oh, we don't care. It's just a place for us to make our show, and we love doing it. So we're gonna keep doing it. So yeah, California King is our new show.
Check it out. I think it's kind of funny. Hey, thanks for doing this.
Thank you, Kent. Thank you very much.
All right, Scott Simpson's been my guest. Something About Your Podcast. Talk to you next time.